What would you do if you could travel back in time? Would you warn society about catastrophic events such as an impending war or natural disaster? Or would you use the opportunity to play the lottery and live out your best life? But what if traveling back in time wasn't a choice? What if you were thrown back in time against your will? Would your answers still be the same? Welcome to Halfway to Hippie, the podcast where we explore different topics like spirituality, alternative forms of healing, starseeds, alternate dimensions, and so much more. Hi, I'm Annette Schmidt, your host and self-proclaimed wannabe hippie who is on a mission to answer questions like, what exactly is the fifth dimension and how do we get there? Are aliens real or is it all just a government hoax? Oh, and what about psychedelics? Are they actually safe and should we be using them? So buckle up because we are taking a trip to see just how deep the rabbit hole really goes. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Season 1, Episode 1. Today, we are going to be discussing the realities of time travel. Now, before we dive into today's episode, though, I want to ask you guys a quick favor. I would love if you could send me in any kinds of stories or messages about synchronicities that have occurred in your life. You can send me a DM on Instagram at halfway.to.hippie. I want to feature these in upcoming episodes, and I would love to hear from you. So let's go ahead and dive back into time travel. So I know it's likely that some of you are probably rolling your eyes at the idea while others are shouting, I knew it. Regardless, though, of which side of the fence you're on, physicists are coming out with more and more theories proving that time travel is a real possibility. So buckle up because today we are going to unpack and dissect the possibilities of time travel, starting with two cases of claimed time travel that have some seriously compelling evidence. Now, one has been scientifically proven while the other hasn't. So it ends up leaving both skeptics and believers scratching their heads. And my question is, if the scientific community is willing to put its stamp of approval on one case of time travel, then what's to say these other cases aren't just as likely? What is keeping us from investigating these a bit further? Don't get me wrong, though. When I started doing my research for this episode and I went down the deep, dark hole of TikTok, I did come across a few claims that just seemed a little bit too surreal to be real. There were a lot of people claiming to be time travelers from the future who came back in time to warn us of impending doom, along with specific dates. Some of these cases include the claim that a Category 6 hurricane is going to hit the U.S. East Coast, which is pretty extraordinary considering right now there are only 5 categories. So that would have to be a really big natural disaster, and it's something that's likely to get everyone's attention. Now, the date that they gave has already passed, so it hasn't happened. Again, a little bit maybe too surreal to be real. Other claims that have been made have been that a T-Rex egg would be discovered, and those that discovered it would also open a portal to a parallel universe. Again, it's something that hasn't happened yet. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying we haven't heard of it. And it seems a little bit, again, surreal to be real. While accounts like these don't provide the best evidence for the case of time travelers, there is some compelling arguments out there for real life cases of time travel, as well as the different theories that make it possible. So today we're going to go over what I found to be two of the most interesting cases, and it just so happens that both of these gentlemen are named Sergei. The first case takes place on April 23rd, 2006 in Kiev, Ukraine. On that day, it was partly cloudy, a balmy 50 degrees outside, and to many, it was just another spring day in Eastern Europe. However, that would quickly change for police as they came across a man who looked to be in his mid-20s wearing what appeared to be vintage clothing and an old-timey camera of some kind. And he was stumbling around and had a very perplexed look on his face. Police quickly approached him and asked to see his identification. Of course, without hesitation, the man handed them his official documents that identified him as Sergei Ponomarenko. Easy enough, right? Wrong. So it turns out that these documents appear to be a national ID card of the disbanded Soviet Union from 50 years ago. And on top of that, Sergei himself was actually claiming that he was just walking the streets of Kiev in the 1950s, moments before police approached him. As you can guess, police did end up taking Sergei into custody, and they immediately transferred him to the psych ward. It was there that he met psychiatrist Pablo Kritov. Now, initially, Kritov believed the man to be suffering from schizophrenia or some other kind of psychotic break. However, slowly Kritov became more and more curious about this young man's story. And after a few sessions with him, he finally decided to do just a little bit more investigating to find out where this man actually came from. Kritov started by having the film from the camera developed, and what he found ended up shocking him. So the first couple of images, they seemed ordinary enough. Sergei was standing on the streets of Kiev posing next to a woman, and the backdrop seemed eerily antiquated, but it was nothing too out of the ordinary. But it did appear, though, as if he could be standing in 1950s Kiev. But the antiquated backdrop wasn't the weirdest piece. As Kritov and photography expert Vadim Posmar looked through the photos, they suddenly came across a photo of what looked to be a saucer-shaped aircraft hovering in the sky. And I have seen these photos myself, and I'll make sure to link them in the description of the podcast in the show notes. These photos, I mean, it looks like a saucer in the sky. Of course, it's an unidentified object, so it doesn't mean it's extraterrestrial, but it's definitely an interesting photograph. It's definitely something to take a look at. Now, according to Sergei himself, when he took the photo of the flying disc, he looked down at his camera, and when he looked up, the next thing he knew, he found himself on the streets of Kiev in a completely different era. After the session, Kritov ended up sending Sergei back to his room so he could do just a little bit more investigating, but little did he know this would be the last time he would ever speak with Sergei. On April 25th, just 2 days after appearing in the streets of Kiev, Sergei disappeared. Now, it was speculated that perhaps he had just simply escaped when no one was looking. However, this theory was really hard to believe since the room itself had bars on the window, and the only way in or out was monitored by cameras the entire time. So, in an effort to track down Sergei, the police began looking for the next best lead, which was the woman standing next to him in the photographs. And to their surprise, not only were they able to locate this woman, but she was also no longer the young 20-something-year-old posing on the streets of Kiev. Instead, when police knocked on her door, they were greeted by a 74-year-old woman who did indeed claim to be the woman in Sergei's photographs. Pretty crazy. So she claimed to be Sergei's fiance, and she also claimed that Sergei did indeed go missing back in the 1950s. And it's interesting because police were able to later confirm that a missing person report was indeed filed matching Sergei's name and description back in 1960. Now, this, of course, caused police to do further investigation into the name Sergei Ponomarenko. And they ended up coming across a recording that was said to be from 1970, where Sergei gave an interview claiming to have information about the future. During the interview, he spoke about how everyone would have a cell phone and discussed microwave technology not known at the time. So my question is it possible that this man was thrown into the future only to return to the 1960s? And if so, how did he travel? Did it have something to do with that saucer in the sky? Remember, that was the last thing he saw before he looked up and was on a street, the same street, in a completely different time. As amazing as this story is, though, there, of course, are a number of people who claim it to be just a hoax, and for various reasons. One is that the camera's film actually wasn't that old or rare. Apparently, it was available until the 90s, so finding it in 2006 wouldn't have been that difficult. The other piece of evidence addressed is the 1970s radio interview. Skeptics are claiming that the audio is just too clean for it to be recording from 50 years ago. But that still leaves the question of, what about the woman in the photos? Was the 74-year-old woman just an accomplice to some mastermind hoax? And if so, then what happened to the actual woman, the young 20-something-year-old standing next to Sergei? And also, Sergei himself, if he was just playing a character, then what was that young man's real name, and why haven't we been able to find him? This first case, I will admit, has what it feels like a lot of evidence between the photos, the psychiatrist, but it equally does have a lot of unanswered questions. Before we go into theories that will help us answer some of these unanswered questions, let's first dive into the second case. Now, our second case of time travel is about a Russian cosmonaut and mechanical engineer, Sergei Krikalev. Krikalev was born on August 27th, 1958 in St. Petersburg, Russia. And growing up, his mother had always wanted him to become a doctor. However, it had always been Kirkalev's dream to become a cosmonaut, and it was a dream that he was determined to achieve. Kirkalev ended up graduating in 1981 with a mechanical engineering degree from Leningrad Medical Institute before joining NPO Inertia, a Russian industrial organization responsible for manned space flights. Now, during his time at the organization, he had impressed many as a pilot, and he also ended up becoming a member of the Soviet Union's National Aerobautics team. And not only that, but he also was part of a ground team that helped plan what was described as an audacious in-orbit rescue for the Salyut space station in 1985. And this helped him earn his cosmonaut wings the following year. And on November 26th, 1988, he departed for his first long flight duration aboard the Mir space shuttle. Krikalev ended up spending 152 days in space before returning to Earth on April 27th, 1989. But it wouldn't be until 2 years later that he ended up breaking records and making time travel history, thanks to the alignment of seemingly random events. On May 19th, 1991, Krikalev departed for his second mission on the Mir space shuttle. Now, he was expected to return when the second crew arrived later that October, but instead he decided to stay on for a little bit longer and to stay on as the crew's flight engineer. Little did he know that by making this decision, his entire fate was about to change. During his time in space, back in 1991, the Soviet Union was beginning to collapse, and one by one, Russian states were starting to declare their independence. This ended up leaving Krikalev and his crewmates wondering what this collapse was going to mean for them and for their families, because it did take an economic toll on both the government as well as the citizens. And not only was he worried about how his wife and 9-month-old daughter would be able to eat on his meager salary of just a couple dollars a month, which was a result of communist ethos and inflation, but he also wondered what this would mean for the future of the space program. Because remember, at this time, there's an entire space crew still in space that was sent up by the Soviet Union that was now collapsing. And as they were collapsing, they were running out of money. So Krikalev realized that the rebuilding of his government back at home meant that saving money would be a priority. But the longer that he was in space, the more concerned he was becoming about his overall health. And it wouldn't be until March 1992 that Krikalev would finally get word that he was being replaced and could return to Earth. Now, by then, Krikalev, the man forgotten in space, had spent 311 consecutive days in orbit. That was twice as long as his originally planned mission. And in the decades to come, he would end up logging a record-breaking 803 total days in orbit. Now, because of the amount of time Krikalev spent in space, he is actually considered the world record holder for time traveling. Yes, you heard that right. There is a world record holder for time travel. According to scientists, Sergei Krikalev is 0.002 seconds younger than anyone else born on the exact same day and time as him back on Earth. And this is all thanks to the theory of time dilation, which states that time speeds up the further you get away from the center of Earth's gravity. And since Krikalev has spent so much time in space, he is now technically living in his future. In fact, all astronauts experience time dilation to some degree, averaging about 0.007 seconds. And even though this is such a minuscule amount of time, the fact is that scientists support the idea of time travel. It still makes you wonder then, if we believe that time travel is real, then why is Sergei from 1950 Kiev implausible, but cosmonaut Sergei plausible? My question is, if we are accepting it's possible, don't we need to accept all possibilities? So hang with me because we are about to get really nerdy and go down the rabbit hole of time dilation as well as some other theories about what makes time travel possible. And this might help answer a lot of questions when we're coming across different time travel cases. The easiest way to think about time dilation is to consider movies like Interstellar, where the main characters leave Earth for a far off planet. And because that planet is so far away, they experience time dilation to an extreme. For every 1 day spent on the planet, 7 years has passed back on Earth. And while this may seem like an exaggerated example, it does help explain how time travel is relative. It's something that Einstein had originally claimed during his lifetime. So, if we go back to Einstein's theories, when he was developing his theory of relativity, he was also examining the relationship between space and time, writing, "People like us who believe in physics know that the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. Time, in other words, is an illusion." Einstein's theory on time travel tied back to his theory of relativity. He believed time to be malleable, just like space, which meant that the measurement of it would be relative to the speed of the person doing the measuring. Let's take Interstellar again as an example of this. If you are on a planet and your body is aging at a different speed or the days are moving at a different speed relative to your current experience, then you are experiencing time differently from those who are back on Earth, who are experiencing time relative to their own experience as well. So, if we use this theory when considering 1950 Sergi, is it possible then that the disc shaped object in the sky transported Sergi into space, allowing time to pass faster on Earth, and then dropped him back on the streets of Kiev? If so, it does still leave the question of what happened to him. And if he did go back in time again, how did he get there? This theory also does support the fact that cosmonaut Sergei grew younger while he was out in space, while everyone back on Earth grew older. It's because time on Earth was moving faster than time out in space, further solidifying the scientific community's support of forwards time travel. But what about backwards time travel then? Are we able to maybe travel back in time and redo history? And what about the grandfather paradox? This is the idea that if you traveled back in time and eliminated your grandfather, you would have never existed in the first place and would never have gone back in time to eliminate your grandfather. Therefore, he would always exist. It's enough to definitely make your head spin. However, even with such challenging questions, there are still more theories being developed to help answer them. So, one of those theories was recently explained in a paper from researchers at the University of Queensland. They claimed that even if time travel were possible, the grandfather paradox couldn't actually exist because the timeline would essentially self correct, ensuring that whatever happened to send you back in time would still happen. Researchers ran the numbers and determined that if someone did travel back in time and change history, events would just adjust themselves so the same outcome would occur. Basically, what they determined was that the universe itself is deterministic, and what's always meant to be will always be. And who knows, that may actually be really good news, especially when it comes to our dreams of the future and all of those positive events that can happen. Another theory continues to evolve as our idea of quantum physics evolves and may soon actually overtake Einstein's theory of relativity and give us an even better understanding of space time. So, as of now, our understanding of matter when using theories of quantum physics is the idea that a particle can be in two places at once. And it's only when it's observed that it must choose which location to be in. According to this theory, perhaps we could be in not only two places, but two times as well. So, hear me out because this is where it gets really cool. As this theory continues to evolve, it may also help explain the science behind timeline meditations. The idea that when you enter a deep meditative state, you can move your consciousness forwards and backwards along your timeline, all without ever physically leaving. Since quantum physics says we can technically be in two places at once and that the matter must only materialize once it's observed, Is it possible that the subconscious traveling can energetically create a physical form of you in another space and time that others are able to observe? So perhaps time travel is actually just some kind of temporary, energetic, out of body experience that happens when we are in a deep meditative state, transcending all attachments to the illusion of time as we know it. This theory definitely doesn't fit the long-standing narrative portrayed by movies. The idea that we can step into some kind of machine in order to change the past or profit from the future. But what if traveling through time was less about being able to change history and more about being able to transcend it, to let go of our attachments not only to time, but all the desires that come with it? We may never truly understand time. It may forever remain a universal mystery to be romanticized in books and movies as the ability to alter history and remake our future. One where we build a machine that moves us along a less than linear path throughout the universe. Or perhaps, in order to truly understand the realities of time travel, we first need to let go of reality itself. So, what do you think? Has time travel already happened, or is it something we are just now discovering? And is it possible to go back in time to change history? And what about traveling into our future? Let me know your thoughts by leaving a review or sending me a DM on Instagram at halfway.to.hippie.